Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. My name is Rachel, your host for today's Ask Us Anything session, proudly brought to you by Scotiabank. So I'm excited to be here today, along with our panel of experts, to answer all your burning questions about immigration, careers and jobs, destination, and of course, settlement in Canada. Now, I'd love to introduce our amazing panel of experts, but rather than me doing all the talking, I'm going to invite each panelist to introduce themselves. So let's start with Rory, founder of Moving to Canada and a licensed recruiter. So, Rory, would you mind sharing a bit about your background?
Hi everyone, my name is Rory Spillane. I'm originally from Ireland. I immigrated to Vancouver in 2008 to take a job in finance. After a few years in Canada, I became very curious about the success factors of newcomers. And over the last 12 years, I've dedicated my time to making life easier for newcomers to Canada. So we've built a fantastic team over that time, and we love helping newcomers.
Great to have you with us, Rory. So, moving on, we have Rebecca. Rebecca, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your experience as a regulated Canadian immigration consultant?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Rachel. I'm Rebecca. I am a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I'm also the operations manager here at Moving to Canada. I, like Rory, moved to Canada from the UK. I actually moved from the UK in 2010. Now I'm a Canadian citizen. I've been helping people in the immigration industry for over 14 years now. It's a real passion of mine. So I love hearing about everyone's immigration stories, obstacles they've overcome, because it really makes me better at my job, and I love connecting with people on their immigration story. So that's me.
Thanks, Rebecca. And last but not least, we have Hugo, who is a commentator on settlement issues featured in major Canadian and international media. He is also our director of partnerships here at Moving to Canada. And fun fact, Hugo moved to Canada through the IEC, or International Experience Canada program, and is now a proud Canadian citizen. So, Hugo, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hard act to follow my colleagues here. Amazing levels of talent and experience between Rebecca and Rory. But I first moved to Montreal in 2011 and worked on the content side of things with some of the top immigration platforms, including Canada Visa, CIC News, and of course, Move to Canada, where I've been for the last 7 years or so. As you mentioned, I'm a proud Irish Canadian citizen, and even more thrilled here to be here today to take the community's questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hugo. And before we dive in, I guess let's just warm up a little bit. For everyone that's tuning in, do let us know where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our global community, and it's always great to see how far reaching it is. And I can already see that there are a few responses here. So thank you for sharing. Keep them coming. And again, it's exciting to have you all here. Now, before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Scotiabank, for making this event possible. Hugo, would you like to add a couple comments on today's sponsor?
Yeah, look, Scotiabank offers some incredible programs tailored specifically for newcomers to help them settle into life in Canada. Whether you're planning to move or recently moved to Canada, Scotiabank is here to give you a warm welcome. The next several months will be full of excitement and new beginnings, and they would like to be there every step of the way to help ease the transition. And Scotiabank can help navigate your journey by providing resources, banking solutions, and tailored advice that help newcomers succeed financially. So you can take advantage today and learn more about their Start Right program. See the details there on the screen, and earn up to $2,000 in value and get a credit limit up to $15,000. And of course, terms and conditions apply, and you can learn about that on movingtocanada.com, where we've got loads of content about Scotiabank. We've been working with them for well over a year now, and they've been a tremendous partner, not just to us, but to newcomers generally.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hugo, for sharing that. Now, let's quickly run through the topics that we'll be covering so that everyone knows what to expect. First, we'll start with immigration. So you can ask about programs like express entry, PNPs, or temporary permits such as IEC and study permits. Next, we'll move on to careers and jobs, where you can ask about job market trends, job search strategies, and also common mistakes that newcomers make. And then we'll move on to destinations and settlement, where you can ask about the best cities to live in, how to adjust to life in Canada, or you can also ask about support services and resources available to help you transition smoothly. So, for everyone watching, these are just a few ideas to get you thinking. Of course, feel free to ask questions throughout, and we'll take it segment by segment. And if we've moved on from a topic, don't worry, we'll have a final Q&A session at the end to wrap it up. So, with that, let's dive into our first topic, which is on immigration. Now, just a quick intro. Did you guys know that over 23% of Canada's population are immigrants? And that number is set to hit 30% by 2036, with nearly 1 million newcomers arriving each year through the 100 plus immigration pathways. And I know that immigration is a big topic, so let's just dive right in. So if you're curious about the future of express entry, international experience Canada, studying in Canada, now's the time to ask. So with that, who's got a question to kick us off? And you know what? Like, I know that it'll take time to brainstorm your questions and type it in. So as we wait for these questions to trickle in, we can even start with the pre-submitted questions we've received. So I'll go over those while we wait. But yeah, feel free to just spam the comments with your own questions in the anytime. And let me just spotlight this so we know, so we can focus on each question. So all these questions are related to immigration. And so our first question came from Imran, and it is, my study permit was refused because I scored 5.5 in IELTS writing, despite scoring 6.5 in all other sections. Why was this used for refusal? I think this question is for Rebecca.
Yeah, so sorry to hear that you got a refusal. Unfortunately, with study permits, it's really common. Refusals among study permits are really high. When you get your letter of refusal, it often doesn't give you full reasons or adequate reasons for the refusal. In this case, they said that your language wasn't sufficient. It's important to remember, in most cases, IRCC do not look at the overall score. They take individual components, and that's because they want you to succeed in all 4 areas. So it could be that your writing, they found that your writing just wasn't sufficient for you to be able to complete your area of study. What you could also do, though, is apply for government notes on your file. The government notes will give you more insight into the refusal. So they may have given a reason why specifically they targeted writing. And so you can take that reasoning and improve and hopefully submit another study permit application in the future, which will be accepted. If you are going to apply for the notes, though, you will need a Canadian citizen or permanent resident to do that for you. So that would be my next. My advice would be to get those notes, see really what was the core of the refusal, and work on that, and hopefully resubmit with a stronger application.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. Is the provincial nominee program possible from Nigeria without a job offer? This question is from Loretta.
So PMPs are in super high demand right now, and whether you're from Nigeria, UK, any country, you're all in the same boat trying to source a PMP. There are some PMPs available which do not require a job offer. There aren't many, but there are a few. What I would recommend that you do is Moving to Canada has a great PMP stream finder. And you can go on that tool and it will use the filter criteria to see which PMPs require a job offer, which PMPs don't require a job offer. And you will be able to use that tool to see which ones you could possibly be eligible for without a job offer. It's hard, but people do succeed. So I would recommend just checking that tool out.
Perfect. And moving on, do you expect any changes to Canadian experience class draws?
yeah, this is a really fun one. Lots and lots of people are interested in Canadian experience class draws for obvious reasons. So the government has really only just started doing CEC specific draws, although CEC applicants were generally more successful in express entry. We do expect that trend to continue. So right now they're kind of doing CEC draws every 2 weeks. What we do know from 2025 is that IRCC are committed to transitioning more temporary residents to permanent residents. So it makes sense that they continue that trend. But what we might also see is category-based draws merge with Canadian experience class draws. So it might be that certain CEC applicants are selected over others. So there will be changes to CEC draws, but hopefully that will all be for the better and more people will be able to transition from that temporary status to permanent status.
Right. Thank you so much. And I think we have a couple questions trickling in from the comments or the live feed. So I'll be projecting them on the screen and maybe we can take it one by one.
Perfect.
So this is the first question. Hi, international student here. Can you please tell us what is your best guess about how or if they will issue PGWPs to current students in areas other than those identified as labor shortages? I think this is in response to that survey sent across.
Yeah, exactly. In June, there was a survey, and part of that survey suggested that they may limit postgraduate work permits to students who are studying in a area that has a traditional labour shortage in that region. And there's really nothing more that we have on that. It's frustrating. The person that wrote this message also said it is frustrating, it's inconvenient, we've just started school. There's a lot of changes right now for international students. The best thing to do is just kind of keep on top of the changes, but try not to let the prospect of future changes deter you from your studies, because I know it's very stressful, but the best thing you can do is do well in your studies and hope that any program changes are to your benefit. And if it's not, there's other options that can be explored. But right now we have no information on how they would do that. It looks like it's going in that direction based on other policies, but it's a case of waiting and see. Yeah.
Right. Let's move on to the next question from Marcus. So I'm going through intensive French lessons to improve my immigration rating. It's not
really a question, but it's actually a really good job, because a lot of people in watching this webinar will probably be in a position where they're looking to increase their CRS score. And although saying to you right now, go and learn French seems super scary and unreasonable, but the reality is it's probably one of the best things that's in your control that you can do to increase your chances of securing that invitation to apply via express entry. So there's a couple of benefits from learning French. It is a boost to your CRS score. If you're able to score CLB level 7, which I guess is like a moderate to high, you will not only boost your CRS score, but you'll also then be eligible for those French language draws. So for those of you that don't know, Canada in their express entry draws do special draws targeting French language speakers. And the cutoff, the CRS cutoff for those are substantially lower than general draws. So if you can commit to, and I know it's very easy for me to say this, a year of saying, you know what, I'm going to give it my all, I'm going to try and learn French to a CLB level 7, that might be your best bet. And also, I don't see this as kind of like a fly-by-night style thing, because IRCC have made a long-term commitment to welcoming French speakers. So up into 2026, they've made a commitment to French speakers. So if you start now, you still have time to benefit from that. So good on you, Marcus. That's probably the best thing you can do with your time right now.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that, Marcus? I think it's really, thanks for sort of making the effort to learn this thing and identifying it. But Rebecca, like, if people are looking for a way to increase their CRS score and they're weighing up learning French versus something else, what might that something else be? And why aren't they leaning into that? And why would they go for French instead?
Well, so there's a number of things you can do. There's like the low-hanging fruit. You can improve your first language. So say if you spoke you submitted English language results and you were kind of at CLB level 8, you could try and get to CLB level 9, CLB level 9, CLB level 10. You can look for PMPs, jobs, etc. But it's also weighing up the time taken to the reward of that. So there's only so much you can get from English, and you'll still be in that pool of general draws or category-based draws. If you focused on learning French, you would then enter this kind of lower threshold draw requirement, which may be more beneficial. It's really a case of like going through and analyzing what options you have to increase your CRS, the time each one would take, and the payoff at the end of it. Sometimes it's a case of doing all these things. Sometimes you can kind of hone in and like, you know what, I'm going to focus all my effort on this one thing.
Like at the end of it, you've also got another language.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll serve you for decades. So
that's another thing. French and English is very prominent in, well, both Hugo and I are in Quebec, so we hear French every day. But even the rest of Canada, having a French and English is a huge plus. Plus, I know people in Ontario, in Vancouver, that have got their job because they're bilingual. So yeah, it's not only will it benefit you now, but it will benefit you in your settlement in Canada. So
good luck, Marcus. Bon chance.
And let us know how it goes. We're interested to hear your journey learning French.
All right, let's move on to the next question, shall we? This is from Chenny. Can you touch on getting a spousal open work permit through a common law partner's IEC program?
Yeah. So for those of you looking at the International Experience Canada program, this specifically excludes spouses as being dependents on this application. So that means at the time you apply, you can't include your spouse. But if you are working in Canada, so if you have a work permit and you're working in Canada, your spouse may be able to get a spousal open work permit that way. But that would require you to be in Canada working for that one, or have a job offer when you activate your work permit. So it's not as straightforward, but it's not impossible. But there's just a few other things you would apply separately under the spousal open work permit program rather than under the IEC. And your partner would need to have a job in Canada. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. A lot of them trickling in here. So this one is from Deji. Do we have any immigration policy for experienced job seekers that allow foreigners to apply for Canadian jobs without IELTS?
Right now, most programs, if not all of them, require English language tests or language tests, whether that's French or English. So if you're concerned about your language level and being able to pass the language test, then that's something you should focus on at the same time, or perhaps as priority to job searching, because language results are required. Even if you get a job, if you want to stay in Canada permanently, you will need language results. Generally, for a job, for a work permit, it's not standard that you would need language results, but it is a possibility that you would need to show that you have sufficient language to do the job. But language would be needed for other areas of relocating to Canada. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next question. How does a work visa differ from other temporary residency? It's quite...
Yeah, so temporary residency just refers to you being able to temporarily stay in Canada. A work visa or permit will allow you to work in Canada. So if you're a temporary resident, but you're a visitor, you wouldn't be allowed to work. You need work authorization. You need a work permit to be able to work in Canada. So that would be the biggest difference. But kind of work visa is a category under a temporary resident.
For sure. And it seems like we do have a lot of questions on immigration, but I'd like to give love to other topics for this video. So we can circle back to it when at the end, but I guess we should move on to our next topic, which is all about finding a job in Canada. So just a little spiel for everyone. With baby boomers retiring, Canada's job market is opening up. And by 2031, around 2.8 million new jobs are expected to be created. But as we all know, landing that first job, especially without local experience, can be challenging. So, with that, if you have questions about the current job market trends or in demand industries or strategies for creating a Canadian style resume or building your network, or rather just common mistakes to avoid during your search, you're in luck because Rory has plenty of expert advice to share with you. So, maybe we could start with the pre submitted questions. Um, so, Rory, any advice on how I can move to Canada after working in a fast food shop for 12 years?
Okay, I guess in that scenario, we don't know where the user is from or their age, but I guess I'd always recommend seeing if you are eligible for any of the temporary work permits or basically, navigating through our website will actually help you select which immigration programs you are eligible for, or will identify some of them. So there's so many different federal and provincial programs. In this case, working it looks like the person has significant experience in a particular sector. One thing I would do beyond that is, first of all, checking if you're eligible to apply for any program independent of an employer. But within that sector, I know there is a lot of sponsorship opportunities. So I'd highly recommend that this candidate kind of maybe researches some of the key players in Canada. You know, you've got the usual global players, maybe plus Tim Hortons, which is a Canadian brand. LinkedIn can be a great tool in terms of finding out who the HR or talent acquisition people are for these brands within Canada. But before you reach out to those people, some cursory research on your side as well. As in, I'd highly recommend using the Moving to Canada immigration quiz just to assess your eligibility for specific programs, and then maybe following up with a consultant if there is any specific intricacies in that. So being well researched and then trying to identify the right people through LinkedIn, and then following that up with an online application. But I think really front loading the research in terms of eligibility for specific programs first.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. This is from Farzana from Ethiopia. She's living in Germany as an immigrant for 4 years with her husband and 2 kids. She says, I have a bachelor's in management and my husband has a degree in software engineering. Despite taking additional training and courses, we haven't been able to find jobs. Is there anything we can do to move to Canada for work and learning?
Okay, so on that one, as I kind of suggested on the first one, is doing some basic research in terms of eligibility for specific programs. In this case, again, without knowing the age of the applicant, it's very hard to know if they would be eligible for express entry program. Or I do note Farzana's husband in software engineering, the technology sector in particular, is still pretty hot in Canada. There's a lot of opportunities in Canada, and there's some specific programs, be it federal and provincial. On a provincial level in BC, there's a program called the BC Tech, PNP, that covers a host of software roles. So there may be sponsorship opportunities if Farzana's husband is well experienced and can reach out to specific recruiters or employers in that sector. So it looks like there's a possibility here of employer sponsorship, and that would bring a spousal work permit for Farzana. But they also may be eligible for some federal programs, such as under the express entry stream.
Amazing. And
Rory, I've got a quick follow-up there. Let's hypothesize that Farzana here figures out immigration. What would be the next step then? One thing I see so often is that people who are approved to move to Canada, they walk in with a weak resume, and you put in so much effort, right, to figure out the immigration part, and then you've got this next challenge, but maybe people don't perceive it as a challenge. Maybe they got by in their home country or in a third country with a particular type of resume. What advice would you have for someone in that situation? They're approved to figure out that part, but hey, now they've got a degree in software engineering, they've got a bachelor's in management. This is a professional. What do they do next?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, the big hurdle is often seen as immigration. And then when people overcome that hurdle, then they just think, right, everything is easy. A local employer in Canada is going to understand my experience perfectly. But that's not the case at all, Hugo. I find that people really let themselves down on what is perceived as the easier section, right? You've jumped through the hoops of immigration. Sometimes that can take, between 6 months up to 2 or 3 years for people. And then sadly, I recruit specifically for the construction sector, and I just see the standard of application. So the key point here is I always ask people is, are you adapting to Canada or asking Canada to adapt to you? And what that entails really is to be successful in Canada, you need to think like a Canadian. You need to act like a Canadian. That means adapting your resume and skills so that they are understood by a Canadian. You present your skills in a Canadian format. You use Canadian values in your resume. So there's a lot of very simple errors that people make, as in you may have a great, Farzana's husband may have a great resume for Ethiopia, but the resume template for Ethiopia does not necessarily apply to Canada. So very simple tools you can access on our website. You can download a Canadian style resume template. You can really focus as a newcomer when you lack local experience. You've really got to sell yourself. You've got to sell the experience that you have. In some sectors more than others, local experience really matters, but it's just an obstacle you need to overcome. So the key takeaway really for people is to sell yourself in terms of the results you have achieved in your role, whether you're an administrator in customer service or whether you're in a complex software engineering or management role. You really need to focus on the outcomes and not the actual daily inputs or the weekly activities that you carried out. So really speaking to performance, because as you said, is you've overcome the obstacle of immigration, and now you want to make sure that you're ready for the employment market, because you don't really get a second chance to present your resume. So I always say is like that making that strong first impression will really, really help.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. I remember when I started working with you, Rory, many, many moons ago, we sat down with one of your candidates at Outpost Recruitment over a coffee, and I just saw how you talked someone through adapting their resume from that duties focus to achievements focus. Like that's difficult to do for 500,000 people and all the people coming to Canada one-on-one, but people can do it for themselves, right? They can get that resume template in the Moving to Canada account and just put on a pot of tea or coffee and just like do 2 hours, and you start winning interviews and you start going in and you're in a better negotiating position. You've got a great blog on Outpost, how to what is it called, Rory? Something like how to increase your starting salary by $10,000.
Yeah.
The blog's about improving your resume. You know, when you put it like that, 3 hours in, $10,000 out, I'd say that's a good return on investment. So
I always tell people it's the best paid part-time job you'll ever have, is in transforming your resume into results-focused resume, because it's not about the projects, or it's not about the company, it's about your impact in the role. And that's what people lose sight of, because we struggle to talk about ourselves and our impact. And sometimes we confuse confidence with arrogance, right? What you really want to do is what impact I had. And then that gives you some talking points as you go through the interview process.
Where can people get that resume template? It's in the Moving to Canada account, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I know Sarah, our community manager, is there in the background. Maybe Sarah, if you can, before the end of the show, drop a link to the onboarding there into the account, and people can get that for free.
All right, let's move on to some questions from the live feed. This one is from Jamie. Quite a lengthy one, but I currently live in Ireland and am considering a move to Ontario with my partner and 2 kids, hoping to make our move in 2026. My partner and I will be 33, 34 at the time. My skill set is in digital marketing and starting out in software engineering. So is there any way to test the employment waters prior to moving? Any recruitment agencies in particular where I can get an idea as to opportunities prior to moving?
Okay. First thought here is, moving with a family. It looks like both are eligible for the the IEC program for Ireland. I'm quite familiar with it. But eligibility for the IEC, there's over 32 countries. It's often the age is either 30 or 35, depending on the country. It's amazing because it gives you an excellent testing the waters, so to speak. I'm not sure how they want to test the waters in particular, but like, instead of committing to the permanent residency process from overseas, which can be a challenge, the IEC is a great gateway to Canada. It gives you you can get an open work permit for up to 2 years. And that's the first step that I would recommend in Jamie's case. The fact that they're both eligible, they can both apply. I believe their probability of success is really high with the Irish program at the moment, although their move date is out in the future. So you've up to a year once you receive your work permit to activate it in Canada. So depending on, I'm not sure what Jamie's exact timeline there, but you can probably wait and apply in next year's program. It looks like it was 2026, I think.
I think they're approved. They're moving to Oakville, so I think they know where they're going. Like, how would they get into the employment market in software engineering? Like, what advice would you give for someone coming as a professional?
Yes. First thing I would do is just acquire your work permit. Then I would say, researching the sector, as in understanding what are the differences between these digital marketing roles and software marketing roles in Ireland versus Canada. Informational interviews can be fantastic. Try and reach out to maybe another Irish person working in a similar role in Canada. Use your local community. You could engage with some employers, but I wouldn't really recommend that until you have a work permit in hand, because you really want to show that you mean business, right? Testing the waters isn't the exciting thing that an employer wants to hear. They kind of want to hear you're all in. So you kind of need to get your psychology there that I'm all in on Canada. I'm going to commit to this. And we just happen to be using the IEC, because you've really got to sell the vision that you're here to stay. Canadian employers are quite conservative. If they know that you're just coming here for 2 years to test the waters and see if you like it, they'll probably choose to hire a local candidate or another newcomer who's fully committed to the move. So I think a little bit of using LinkedIn, getting your resume fundamentals right, understanding the differences between the role. If Jamie wants to reach out, I could recommend a great tech recruiter. And I could probably recommend some marketing recruiters as well. So they can feel free to reach out to me. It's my first name at movingtocanada.com. So note the 2 there. And if they want to send me an email, I can happily recommend some recruiters.
I have, sorry, Hugo, I have a quick question from that. Because obviously working on the immigration side of things, a lot of people ask me, like, they're kind of put off by the process. They're like, it's really hard to crack the Canadian job market. And it's like, you know what? From my perspective, and I know I went through it, I was applying for jobs from England, had no luck, was able to secure employment in Canada when I landed. What kind of advice do you then have for people that are not yet in Canada or don't have a clear path to Canada, as clear a path? Like, would you recommend a different approach to their job search, or would you just kind of say, no, it boils down to the same thing, having their results, resume, keep going, be consistent, things like that?
Yeah, I always try and describe job hunting as in, people simplify it as in, I get my immigration, I send out my resume, and then I just wait and I sit back and I see. It's very much a process, an iterative process. It starts with the research, the informational interviews, the learning. What job titles am I targeting? What weaknesses do I have relative to local candidates? What is there potential training that I need to speak to an employer to get me up that learning curve? So when you lack local experience, you've really got to acknowledge the learning curve and also the immigration risk. I touched on that a few moments ago. You've got to understand as a newcomer that you are a flight risk to an employer. There's embedded immigration risk, and you need to talk about why you want to move to Canada, how you're excited to do it, what you expect to get from this, and think long term. Even if your mindset is just looking at a year or two, you've got to think long term when you communicate to employers. I think the biggest frustration people have, Rebecca, whether they're overseas or in Canada, is you're doing things online. Online is just part of the process. You can send an online application, but you can expect to, most likely you will never hear from it unless you're successful. You'll never get any feedback, but there's ways you can go beyond that, as in reaching out to people on LinkedIn or reaching out to people who work at the company and trying to get a little bit of feedback. Or another thing a lot of people do, Rebecca, is they waste a lot of time applying for roles that they're not eligible for. And that's why I talk about the research, right? Is in, if you're punching way above, everyone should have ambition. I got to Canada because of a role that I didn't feel I was qualified for. I got offered a role in Canada that was my dream role, but I didn't think I was eligible for it. So there's make mistakes of ambition, but you also need to be realistic about what kind of job titles, trying to move sector or taking on a senior role when you're a junior. I think people waste a lot of time sending out spurious job applications, where doing 5 to 10 tailored job applications will get you much further than sending out 50 to 100 spurious job applications online. And really try to personalize it, as in try to get to know people. And if you put the work in, you'll typically get the results back. We often get, excellent cover letters or applications. And when you see that level of effort put in, it'll always tease you to give people an employer an update. Even if we're not hiring for that role, I'll always thank person for putting such a detailed application together, because you can see they've researched the role, they've researched who's in the team, they've researched your company, and then you just say, look, sadly, we're not hiring at the moment, but I really appreciate the time you put into your application.
Such a good point.
Yeah, really good feedback, and I think a lot of hopeful immigrants can take that and really use it, because again, you hear stories of people applying for hundreds and hundreds of positions, and it's really damaging to obviously your self-esteem if you just keep on getting rejections. But it could be that your approach is off, and that really focusing on those core opportunities would be more beneficial.
Yeah, and really going back to the process part, and my biggest challenge as a recruiter is I get, people contact me and they say, oh, I've been applying for roles for months, and then I see the list, or more worryingly, they don't even know where they have applied, and I call that, they turn into a headless chicken. It just becomes, I'm just going to keep scattering my resume everywhere and hoping that somebody takes pity on me. But job hunting needs to be more calculated than that. You really need to kind of put a positive mindset out and make it clear why I'm the right person for this role. And then really, a lot of the applications we get through Outpost, 80% of them are unqualified, wholly unqualified for the role. So I'd really encourage newcomers to think carefully about where you send your resume. Putting the right resume into the right employers is always the goal. And be a lot more calculated in your approach, and then putting custom work into the research, and the cover letter can be very powerful.
I guess this next question is a good segue related to resumes. Would it be appropriate to include on my resume that I'm on a working holiday visa? And if so, how should I present it to highlight that in my resume? I guess this is also a main concern for majority of the temporary residents, having to explain to their employer that they have a deadline, and that they're worried that that might deter the employer from moving forward with them. So how would you maneuver through this?
When I'm presenting a candidate through Outpost in construction, I'll typically have a note, as in there will be a data point will be the work permit or their eligibility to work. So obviously, if you're working through a recruiter, they'll provide the additional information to their clients right on that. But if you're making a direct application, if Una is in this place, she's making a direct application. Yeah, there's no harm in your opening profile or your professional summary on the top of your resume. You could put arriving in Canada on date X and eligible to work for 1 to 2 years, in this case. So yeah, it's kind of implied that you are eligible to work if you apply for a job in Canada, unless the role, I always point out to job seekers that unless the role explicitly says this is an employer sponsorship opportunity, it should be implied that you are authorized to work by applying for that job. But there's no harm in putting a note, albeit through a recruiter or on the start of your resume, just to make it clear that you're eligible to work.
if I can jump in with a quick follow-up there, like, yeah, highlighting that you're eligible to work in Canada, Rory, and when you're arriving, and potentially even like how long your work status goes to can be valuable. But then if you're in an interview setting, I think in terms of immigration risk that you alluded to, you need to show that you're going to look after yourself when it comes to staying in Canada, and not be like, hey, you're meeting 10 candidates today, I'm one, can you please help me stay? You're just creating friction and like sort of demerits in your application there. You're like, I'm coming initially on this 2-year thing, and I will find a way to stay. And you can even like point out ways to, hey, there's this express entry thing. I've already lined up my English test. I'm actually learning French because that's going to give me extra. Like you can speak to these things at that moment, and sort of mitigate the risk that you've alluded to earlier, that you're gonna leave town, right? And as employers are looking for people not just to come in with talent, but also to stick around for a number of years. So yeah,
you'll always find better training or better opportunities if you can sell the long-term vision for Canada, right? It's great if, in Una's case, if she can come here on a temporary work permit. It's whether it's 1 or 2 years, but Una would really need to have a vision before she meets with employers. She would need to be able to address her long-term vision. She would say, my intention is to apply for PR through program X, but I'm arriving initially on a 2-year open work permit.
Perfect. Now, I guess we could move on to the next segment, which is on destination and settlement. Now, whether you're drawn to the hustle of Toronto or the wild Rockies, there's a place for everyone. But since it's visiting every city before your move isn't always an option, how do you make the right choice? And I guess that's majority of the people's concerns when they're looking at Canada, like living and moving to Canada. So here we will share some tips on where to settle and how to adjust to life in Canada smoothly. And we can move on with the questions, the pre-submitted questions that we received. So the first one is, what are the next steps to move to Canada as a permanent professional worker with a teaching certificate and a bachelor's degree from Cameroon? Any takers for this?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. But first thing, Rebecca, you'll notice this as well. Like Cameroon's really shooting up the charts in terms of source countries for professionals to move to Canada. We saw that in the latest Express Entry report. And it was already alluded to, people with high levels of English and French, they're really winning at the moment. And Cameroon, obviously, that would be one reason why. But as I'm going to make a stab at pronouncing this person's name, and forgive me if I get it wrong, but Engalef. This person, like there's a ton of professionals there, highly educated, bilingual. That's what Canada's looking for. So what the next steps to move to Canada is permanent resident with a teaching certificate. Jump in the Express Entry pool. You'll probably have a bunch of points, especially if you're under 35 or even younger than that, under 30. If you've got both languages, a bachelor's degree, and some years of professional experience, you're going to perform really nicely in the pool and be eligible for those French draws that Rebecca already mentioned. But beyond that, to do that, I would advise people to jump and use the CRS calculator on moving to Canada, because you'll discover your eligibility as well as your points total. So we've got it up there. Perfect. Yeah, you can see there, you can start filling it out, and you'll see your eligibility and your points total at the end, and then some context afterwards in terms of how competitive you might be. And then once you're approved, assuming that you perform nicely in the pool, it'll take a few months potentially for the application to be processed. The person has a teaching certificate, so it's probably going to be an accredited occupation. So while pre-arrival, you're dealing with the federal Department of Immigration. Once it comes to credential recognition, you're probably going to then have a provincial authority. Canada's a federation, so 10 provinces, 3 territories, a bunch of different rules and ways of doing things from between the different destinations. You should then look into the province you're intended to move to and see how early it would be to start the process of getting that credential recognized so that you can perform the same role in Canada. The same would go for other accredited occupations, maybe accountants, legal professions, obviously, but there might be some sort of that might be even more onerous. But healthcare workers would be the big one. Nurses moving to Canada. So this person's got a teaching certificate, but if you're an accredited occupation in your home country, it's likely that you'd need to get reaccredited in Canada. Physiotherapists, things of that nature. And that would be the next step after being approved to move here, would be to look into how to do that, because it's all over the news all the time. Rory, you know this as well. How long have we been saying that process needs to start earlier and move faster? So the earlier and faster you can do it, the earlier and faster you'll be able to start working in your role in Canada once you land here.
Hugo, thanks. Can I just jump in here, because I just see an opportunity for immigration. I'm really just going to identify the need to stay on top of immigration updates, news, and etc. So if you do enter the express entry pool, like Hugo suggested, French, you will likely do great. Category-based draws, for those of you who don't know, target certain professions, and those targeted professions change on a yearly basis. And it looks like they're going to change them in 2025 to include education professions. So that's another reason to enter the express entry pool. Education teachers may be targeted in the future as well. So again, identifying that if you're looking at immigrating to Canada, you really need to be on top of changes when it comes to immigration, because it changes on a regular basis. The landscape is constantly kind of shifting. We have a newsletter. You can sign up for our newsletter. We send these important updates out. That was one thing I wanted to encourage you to stay on top of that. A second thing, actually, the province of Quebec has got a real shortage of French-speaking teachers. So if you're looking kind of like which province, I'm sure all provinces have this shortage. I live in Quebec, so I'm aware of the shortage. I've got kids that go to a French school that need French teachers. So maybe Quebec would be a great option for you to look at the province of Quebec. You could look at that. There might be some complications with express entry, but I'm sure with your background, you'll be able to find a way. So,
perfect. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Will there be post-arrival support, such as mentorship or job assistance in my field? I land in Canada in 8 weeks. From Zanabil.
Yeah. Well, this person is roughly 2 months out from arriving. I'm going to slightly adapt the question. I will address the specific post-arrival aspect, but I wanted to draw your attention, Sanabil, to the potential pre-arrival support you can get as well. If you're coming, for example, as a permanent resident, there are a bunch of pre-arrival career support organizations funded by the government, including one of our partner organizations, Canada Infonet. And they help people transition to the job market, including access to mentorship. I would look into those. In terms of post-arrival support, there are other organizations that are on the ground here in Canada. Some of them serve, say, more niche. It might be people who speak a particular language or in a certain profession or bound for a specific destination. And there's so many of those, dozens, if not hundreds of those organizations that you can find on the IRCC website. I'd encourage you to look up newcomer support organizations in Canada, insert your destination there, and you should get some pretty nice results, and contact those and see which of those might be in a position to take you on as a client. And very often those are publicly funded as well.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. Just remove the screen. I will be landing in Toronto in October as part of the IEC. I have employment secured and staying in an Airbnb for a few weeks. How do I secure an apartment if Ireland doesn't offer credit score?
Yeah, I can take that. First of all, looking forward to having you here in Canada in a month. It's a great time to arrive. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, but do bring your jacket, because you are heading straight into winter in Toronto there, which might be a bit of a culture shock. So the person's got employment secured. Good job. Staying in Airbnb Liz sounds like a very put together newcomer. We should all learn from Kernsky here. Job lined up, pre-arrival, temporary accommodation lined up, but then they're asking, how do they secure an apartment? Let's just make it more general. If they don't have credit score history in Canada, or they can't leverage the credit score that they might have built up abroad within the Canadian marketplace, this is a pretty common concern among people. Two things. One is, how do you get your apartment? I'd say, look, you're coming through IC, the minimum amount of settlement funds you need to bring is, I believe, $2,500. I would encourage you to use these final few weeks to try and build up as much above and beyond that you can, and then be in a position to offer as much sort of pre-approved rent as possible. What you're trying to do is give the landlord or prospective landlord confidence that you're not a flight risk from the unit, right? That you that they've got some sort of collateral that they can have more confidence that you're going to be a good tenant, right? So you don't have a credit history to lean on in Canada, but if you've got, say, multiple months rent available to sort of provide up, I don't know, it depends on the province how much people are allowed to ask for or give. So off the top of my head, I don't know the exact rule for Toronto or for Ontario specifically, but that is something that people can do. Above and beyond that, though, you can start trying to build a credit history as soon as possible upon landing, even while you're staying in the Airbnb. You could go to Scotiabank, for example, the sponsor of today's event, open up an account with them, get access to a $15,000 credit limit, and start spending on that and paying it back. You'll start seeing your credit limit. You're going to start building your credit history within the first few months, and Scotiabank's a great way to sort of start that process. There you go. They've sponsored a piece on the website. You can find all. We did Stephen, one of the people we are happy to work with here at Moving to Canada. He's done a great video there with Scotiabank on building up a credit history. So, look, it might mean taking out a second or even a third month of temporary accommodation before you have enough of a credit score to give the landlord confidence. But we find among the banks in Canada that Scotiabank offers one of the best onboarding processes into this kind of thing in terms of starting and building a credit history. And Sarah, if you can get that and throw it in the comments, it'd be amazing how to build a credit history in Canada and why it matters. Because we're finding that so many members of our community are gravitating towards Scotiabank for this exact reason.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. Are some provinces easier to immigrate to than others?
I mean, in terms of immigration, look at that depends on your credentials. I mean, like if I'm a long haul truck driver, Saskatchewan might want me. If I'm a healthcare worker, BC might want me. You know, like, so I'm going to take this question and interpret it as culture, lifestyle, social life, job opportunities, and sort of put aside which ones are easiest to immigrate to from an immigration point of view, because like you have to get that person's full profile and resume to answer that question. Marcus, unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. So are some provinces easier to immigrate to than others? Cost of living is a factor, right? I would sort of adapt the question even and drill down into city specific or destination specific. Like Rory's sitting in his apartment in Vancouver. When you moved, when Rory, 15 years ago or so? Things have changed there. It's let's just say it's a higher cost of living now than it was back then. And that's just one example. I'm using that. But if you were to go 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers out of town, cost of living would be easier. If you're a remote worker and you can afford to live, say, outside an urban core, it might be easier to do that. But let's just go with Marcus's question there for a second and lean into the provinces aspect. Climate is a factor. BC and the sort of Nova Scotia do have slightly milder climates than the rest of the country. Some provinces don't even have like a big international airport. If you need to get home twice a year, like these are sort of creature comforts that people often consider when they think about where to move to in Canada. Just in terms of thinking about it from an immigration point of view for a second, look, I'm in Quebec. Like if you want to move to Quebec, it's probably, if you don't speak French now, you should probably start learning it soon. And actually, I believe this is the same guy who's learning French. So yeah, like that's going to stand in your favor for sure if you want to settle here long term. And then it really depends on your occupation. The PMP stream finder, Rebecca, that we have on movingtocanada.com, that will really help people figure out which PNP stream might be most appropriate for them or easier to move to, which province might be easier to move to based on, for example, their work history or existing connections to Canada. As I alluded to there, like some provinces have occupation lists. If your occupation's on it and it's not on another one, other things being equal, it's going to be easier to immigrate to the province that is actively looking for people who have your skill set, experience, and credentials.
Mm-hmm. I would also say there's other things you can look at if you're worried about settlement, like PMP's issue stats on retention rate. So maybe you might be really surprised to know that people that move to Nova Scotia are more likely to stay in Nova Scotia, whereas people that go to BC are more likely to move out. So you can use that kind of information to also help inform your decision of where to move. But I would agree when it comes to immigration, it really depends on your specific background. The process of applying for PMP is very similar. So how provincial programs work is that the province is they're mandated to review eligibility. So the process of being approved is very, very similar. You have to kind of submit all the same similar documents. So as far as the process is concerned, it's very similar, but it would really depend on your individual merits and attributes as to which one would be easier for you. But if you're concerned about way of life and things, you can look at provincial retention rates to see how other immigrants have settled. I think that's also a useful data point. It might not be the be all and end all, but it gives you an idea.
Yeah, I'd like to top up on that. It's a really good point you just made there, Rebecca. In addition, like let's imagine someone's been approved through a federal program and is then deciding like where to move to. Canada's Job Bank has this sort of wage comparison tool. It's amazing. So let's say, okay, I've been approved to move to Canada, whether temporarily or permanently, and I have the luxury of choice. I can choose where to go. What do I do next? I would look at the Job Bank and input your occupation and see what the salary ranges would be in various locations you're interested in. Maybe compare that to the cost of living. There's a great website out there called Numbeo that you can look up, numbeo.com, and sort of try to align these things. I mean, very often those destinations or provinces that might pay more also happen to be some of the more expensive places to go, but you might find sort of a sweet spot. I know I was talking to someone recently who's moving to Edmonton. They can buy a house within a year or two moving to Edmonton. The salary is roughly similar to what they would get in Toronto or Vancouver, and they're making that decision to go there. So for that person, they've made the choice of Edmonton, which is in the province of Alberta, for that reason. So there's so many considerations for people where to go. But yeah, Job Bank, get on it.
All right. Now, before we wrap things up, I do want to make sure that we've covered everything that's on everyone's mind. So if seems like we have a lot of questions to go through and we don't really have the luxury of time for it. So I'll try to narrow it down to the 10 questions that we have left before we wrap up. But of course, we'll try to keep things as fluid as possible. So I'm just going to star some of the comments or some of the questions we have. And if you guys can do lightning speed answering the questions, that would be fantastic.
Quick fire
just
buzzer.
So that we could do everyone's questions.
Fingers on the buzzer. Let's go.
You're on time. All right. So first question, your best guess about...
This was to the postgraduate work permit. So we've covered.
We covered that.
Postgraduate work permit.
Next up, I'm Jane from London. I have my port of entry letter and the deadline to use this is April 2025. Once I activate, will my visa be for 2 years? I turned 36 in April, so hope this won't affect anything.
Yep, you're good. As long as you've got your port of entry letter, you just need to activate it before it's expired and it will be good for the 2-year period. Things like make sure you've got insurance for 2 years. That will be a determining factor.
Can we touch on that for a second?
Yeah.
Like I know we said it was quick fire round, but like we see this all the time. We've been working with, assume this person, look, I'm putting some dots together. POE letter, London, 2 years. I'm guessing this is IEC, even though it's not explicitly stated. We see it so often that people come to Canada either with the wrong private health insurance, which is mandatory, by the way, or they're like, I'll dip my toes in, I'll see if I like it, I'll come in April, I'll stay for the summer, I'll just take out 5 months insurance because it's £200 versus taking it for 2 years, which might be, say, more than that. And then they're like, I really like it here, I'd like to stay, but guess what? Your work permit is done, you're out. Like you have to leave unless you've got some miracle method of staying. See this all the time. Rory, we were talking to one of our partners about this recently, about travel insurance. And we still see people making this mistake. So Jane, yeah, you're good to go. You can, once you got your PO letter, you're fine, but just make sure you get the right insurance and make sure you get it for the full 2 years.
Moving on, this seems like an employment question. Which are the most required or sought after professions in Canada?
I guess the categories would be sort of an indication of that, Rebecca, right? Like that's the government signaling what they need, right?
So you've got like trade, healthcare, STEM,
agriculture.
Agriculture. So you've got those ones. You've got new emerging ones. So natural resources, education. A lot of provinces are focusing on healthcare, construction, childcare. Looking at how PNPs, I find looking at what PNPs are targeting which occupations can be a very good indication of where the federal government will go. So have a look out for PNPs, what they're targeting, federal government, the occupations they're targeting, to get an idea of which ones are most sought after.
Right, moving on from Eleonora. Hi, from Italy. Does the POE letter for work permits expire? I think we've discussed this prior.
Yeah, that would be true, though, even if it was not an international experience. This guy's from Italy, so it probably is. So even if you have a port of entry letter from any kind of work permit, it will expire. So you have to make sure you enter Canada before the expiry of that letter.
And remember, you can fly to Canada to activate your work permit as well. If it's this is your last chance and you don't have, with the IEC, if you let the POE expire, you can reapply. I understand the rules have changed recently, but if this is, as with the last person, if this is your last chance to get to Canada, take a flight to Toronto for a weekend just to activate your work permit. And then if you're moving there 3 or 4 months later, but just be conscious that your 2 years starts from the date you activate the work permit.
Quick one on that, Rory, as well. People should really activate it rather than assuming that they'll be invited for another program in a future season, right? Because it's a competitive program, they might not be invited again. So if Canada gives you the opportunity to come here, don't assume that they're going to do it a second or a third time.
Moving on from Steve, if you are in Canada on a tourist visa, I'm a retiree, and you have to go back to your home country every 6 months, how long must you stay in your home country before you can go back to Canada?
Technically, and a lot of people do this, they just kind of go down to the US and come back. But the more you do that, the harder time you're going to have. The more you're going to have to justify what you're doing in Canada, why you need to be in Canada. So it's always a risk. You could also try and apply and extend your visit visa online, which might be a safer bet. But if you are going to leave the country and come back, just remember every time you come back, you have to justify what you're going to do, that you've got independent funds, that you're not going to work and things like that. And it will get harder and harder each time you do it.
Moving on from a question from Sarah. Hi, everyone. Lovely to join you all from Ireland. I was wondering if it is still possible for a spouse of a skilled worker on an IEC work permit to flagpole for their spousal open work permit. Thanks so much.
So flagpoling has become harder and harder in the last couple of years. So IEC, you can't flagpole. Postgraduate work permit, you can't flagpole. There's certain categories where you can if you're still eligible for. So if you are considering flagpoling, just have a look at your local land border to see the hours that they accept flagpoling if they do.
I believe you actually need to make appointments now.
Yes,
definitely.
And you could also still be turned away. They could not have the resources. I've heard so many people actually have been turned away now, even though technically they're eligible. They're trying to dissuade people from using the land border to activate statuses. They're trying to encourage people to apply online. So
yeah, I would definitely don't assume that what worked for your friend 2-3 years ago is going to work for you. Those sort of word of mouth anecdotes, that's look, in this industry, you just hear, especially in immigration, oh, like I did it last year, you'll be fine. Like you gotta cross-reference these things and look at the official sources and don't assume, validate.
Sarah, you could also join the Moving to Canada IEC forum as well, and you might be able to get very up-to-date anecdotes on this, right, as well. So the key is just making sure it's recent, right, and not, as Hugo pointed, if what applied 2 years ago may not apply anymore right now.
2 weeks ago, yeah. That forum is on Facebook, and Sarah, if you have the link handy, just drop it in so people can join. Thanks.
Yeah, we have a lot of IEC people today.
Next question. Can you talk about the Mobility Francophone program? I am learning French and I would love to apply to that one before my IEC expires.
Okay, so this is actually a really good question because it, again, identifies the importance of French. So as part of the efforts to increase the number of French speakers coming to Canada, IRCC have created the Francophone Immigration Mobility Program, and that allows French speakers, so employers of French speakers, to be LMIA exempt. So an advantage of if you can show CLB level 5 and you have a job offer in most sectors, you are LMIA exempt. So the LMIA is a labour market impact assessment, and that's needed if an employer wants to hire a foreign worker. And that's often a big obstacle for Canadian companies hiring foreign workers. So the advantage of the Francophone Mobility Program is that it can be LMIA exempt. So there's less paperwork, there's less onus on or burden on the employer. So that's another reason actually to learn French. CLB level 5, not only, CLB level 7 opens up express entry draw options, but learning CLB level 5 can open up employment opportunities for you as well.
And you get to skip the LMIA process through that as well, or your employer does, right? So,
and that's often one of the biggest hurdles that people have to overcome is kind of getting an employer on board with the LMIA process, because it can be a bit of a pain. But in this case, it's LMIA exempt, so there's still things required from the employer, but it's not as onerous. So.
Very quickly on that, there is an article on our website, like how French can help you move to Canada. It is sponsored by Scotiabank, the sponsors of today's event. It's an amazing resource that goes through, yes, the permanent immigration streams where you can leverage French, but also Mobility Francophone, which is a temporary work permit option. But it points out how you can access that, even with, as Rebecca alluded to, a slightly lower language threshold of CLB 5. Amazing. Whoever's got the controls here, doing amazing. And yeah, Una tica pura vida, that person's definitely from Costa Rica, just calling out that I go to your home country every winter because my in-laws are there and it's amazing. So thanks for coming up to Canada, and hope you have a great time here.
Moving on, this seems like the settlement question. Is New Brunswick a good place to settle down?
Why not? I mean, look, here's sort of there was a pandemic recently. You might have heard about it, right? It started around 4.5 years ago now, which is kind of a crazy thought. But at that time, a lot of people, Canadians and immigrants alike, who had moved first to a big destination, then started looking at other parts of Canada where they might have some lifestyle or cost of living benefit of both. New Brunswick is one of the places where they saw tons of people moving to, along with Nova Scotia. That indicates that this is a place that, especially for families and people maybe with remote work options, that this is a place that they should look at. There's 3 main cities in New Brunswick: Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John, not to be confused with St. John's, which is in Newfoundland. They're all sizable enough without being huge. It's not just villages and towns. Those are 3 genuine cities. There's regions of New Brunswick, while it's primarily Anglophone, it does border Quebec, and there's big Francophone communities as well. And it's on the US border. There's good access to international airports if you're coming and going. And it's a beautiful part of the world. It's got a nice coast. It's kind of got access to PEI, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. I would say it's a great place to settle down, New Brunswick.
Next question. Getting a job as a foreigner is quite difficult. Please shed some light. So any general advice?
Rory, get stuck in there.
Yeah, look, it's always a challenge, right? As in it amazes me, and I just want to be clear with everyone that so many applicants chat to me about Canada and they say, do they actually want me to come? Because the immigration story is we need immigrants, but the jobs market is really, really difficult to break into. Everything takes time here. If you're a local candidate, recruitment takes time. If you're overseas and lack experience, it takes even longer. So it's a real combination of research, tact, and persistence. And we've so much content on that in the Moving to Canada website. There's a lot of blogs on Outpost. It is a construction-focused thing, but there's a lot of general advice blogs on that. We love coaching newcomers on that. If you want to be coached, there's so many resources between Moving to Canada and Outpost to help people like Babatunde. It is difficult, but the best things in life are challenging. So I just encourage people to just see it as an iterative process and not a kind of spray and pray approach. If you're lucky enough to get through the immigration hurdle, then there's still a lot of work to do. And just measures, the best thing to do is a lot of people measure it of my success in Canada depends on having a job or not. If you can, like any big project, if you can break it down into sub tasks or sub kind of milestones, it makes it a lot rewarding, right? For example, if John Babatunde could measure himself on interactions, interviews, or measure yourself in conversations with people in your industry and see that as a learning curve as opposed to just being constantly unfrustrated until you have that job in hand. But try to break it down in constituent parts and just see it as a challenge that is very, very satisfying. Once you have that job, you look back on the month or the 3 months that it took to find work in your field, and you just kind of go, that was all part of the learning curve. But it's extremely frustrating when you're in the middle of that process. So psychology is really important, and mindset. You just got to believe in yourself, and you just got to take on the right advice, right? Always think, am I adapting to Canada, or am I expecting Canada to adapt to me?
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question from Elliot. CRS points required for CEC are reducing. Do you have an idea of where they might stabilize? For example, 470, 480. Rebecca, this seems like a question for you.
Ooh.
I think you are on mute.
Right. I would love to be able to say that we're going to see 470. I have no idea when that will happen, if that will happen. If IRCC continue to do these regular draws, CEC draws, we might see a reduction. If they introduce or merge CEC with category-based draws, we'll see a reduction. But again, not everyone will be able to benefit from that. So again, rather than waiting for the CRS to drop, try and be proactive in areas that you can increase, because really there's going to be change. We don't know what's going to happen. 470 a few years ago would have been fantastic. Right now it's not. So rather than focusing on waiting for the CRS to come to where you are, try wherever you can to increase your CRS. If you've got Canadian experience, that might be kind of looking for the future. So if I gain additional experience, what does that mean? Where will I sit? I might gain points here, lose points there, kind of try and have more of a long-term vision of what you can do, what you can be proactively doing rather than waiting for it to come down.
Yeah, on that, like I always say to people, like you can't change your date of birth, but there probably is something you can change to increase your score. What people shy away from is that it takes a huge amount of effort and it's a big challenge. Getting a job offer, 50 or 200 points, depending on whether it's skilled or senior management. Provincial nomination, 600 points. French, we've already touched on it. And also not thinking of just like, hey, I've got CEC, is the French thing is the only category that's not occupation-based, it's language-based. So that allows you to dip under the bar, so to speak, because the bar is much lower. Provincial nomination, job offer, French. Sibling in Canada, probably not going to happen unless you happen to have a sibling in Canada. Second language, if you haven't maxed out your points for your first language, take another language test. There's so much you can do.
Up next, Which will be the recommended French educational institutions that newcomers could start before applying?
This is the only question in this where I'm going to say I don't know enough to answer that confidently.
No, I think it's tough. I assume that you're asking for how someone would go about learning French. And we're saying learn French. Okay, what are the steps required? What I would say is try and do some research. Remember, you're learning French to pass an exam. Like, I don't know if that makes a difference, but you've got to be exam ready. That might change how you undertake these classes. I personally learn better online, like online classes. I can be quite structured, so I don't need to have an in-person class. You might need that. But I think knowing what your strengths are as a student will help dictate kind of where you can go to learn French. But again, each country will have different institutions available. So just do a bit of research, try and see if anyone's done it before, what their success has been from doing that. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. I mean, thank you everyone for answering all the questions, but I believe we're good for time. This live stream was meant to be an hour long, and we're way past that. But just to give everyone comfort, we will be posting this video. It will be available on all our channels shortly after, so make sure to tune in for that. You can also keep an eye on your inbox for a recap of today's session, along with all the resources you need to guide you on your journey to Canada. But yeah, that brings us to the end of today's live session. Again, a huge thank you to our panel of experts for sharing their valuable insights, and of course to Scotiabank for making this event possible. I just want to quickly show again the offering. There's the Scotiabank Start Right program. And Hugo, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, the points speak for themselves to a large extent, but I'll just rattle through some of the highlights. You can earn up to $2,000 in value in your first year in Canada. In fact, in your first year banking with Scotiabank, they think they give newcomer status to anyone who arrived within the last 5 years. So it doesn't necessarily need to even be your first year in Canada, just in your first year banking with Scotiabank within the first 5 years of landing in Canada. You get unlimited no-fee international money transfers, a welcome bonus of up to $600. No monthly account fees in your first year. Quick segue there, like banking in Canada, you pay a monthly account fee for the right for the bank to host your money. That might be different than your home country. They'll waive that for the first year. And huge, I can't remember the person's name, but they were asking about accommodation in Canada and credit history and whatnot. One of the best things you can do is gain access to credit from the get-go in Canada. And Scotiabank offers that $15,000 credit on an unsecured credit card as soon as you arrive, which means that, the day after you're arriving, you can be spending and obviously paying off your bill. And we've got a whole video on that on our YouTube channel. Yeah, we can go to the bottom one, which is 10 free equity trades and invest a minimum of $1,000. So look, there's a whole big package there. They've also got branches the length and breadth of Canada. If you ever want to go into a branch rather than just banking online, their app is awesome. And they're the bank for newcomers in our view. And we're delighted that they hosted this event today. Or not hosted, sponsored. Sorry.
Well, again, a huge thank you to Rory, Rebecca, Hugo for sharing your invaluable insights. To everyone watching, don't forget to check out all the helpful resources on your screen. You can visit the websites by scanning the QR codes, or if you prefer, we can hyperlink them in the description of our social channels so that you have a good guide on your journey to Canada. But yeah, that wraps it up. And once again, thank you for everyone for joining us and for all your great questions. It's been a pleasure to connect with you all. So
thanks to Rachel for hosting.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.